The Gospel according to Luke, chapter 1, verse 1 through 23. Since many have undertaken to compile a narrative about the events that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed on to us by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the word, I, too, decided, as one having a grasp of everything from the start, to write a well-ordered account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may have a firm grasp of the words in which you have been instructed. In the days of King Herod of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly order of Abijah. His wife was descended from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. Both of them were righteous before God, living blamelessly according to all the commandments and regulations of the Lord. But they had no children because Elizabeth was barren, and both were getting on in years. Once, when he was serving as priest before God during his section's turn of duty, he was chosen by lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, to enter the sanctuary of the Lord to offer incense. Now at the time of the incense offering, the whole assembly of the people was praying outside. Then there appeared to him an angel of the Lord standing at the right side of the altar of incense. When Zechariah saw him, he was terrified, and fear overwhelmed him. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you will name him John. You will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He must never drink wine or strong drink. Even before his birth, he will be filled with the Holy Spirit. He will turn many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God. With the spirit and power of Elijah, he will go before him to turn the hearts of parents to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord." Zechariah said to the angel, "How can I know that this will happen? For I am an old man and my wife is getting on in years." The angel replied, "I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I have been sent to speak to you and to bring you this good news. But now, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their time, you will become mute, unable to speak, until the day these things occur." Meanwhile, the people were waiting for Zechariah and wondering at his delay in the sanctuary. When he did come out, he was unable to speak to them, and they realized he had seen a vision in the sanctuary. He kept motioning to them and remained unable to speak. When his time of service was ended, he returned to his home. You may be seated.
Takes all of us. Advent 1, the Sunday of hope. Zechariah and Elizabeth, really it's Zechariah starting off our Sunday and our Advent series. And they had hoped for so long to have a child. And they couldn't. Some of you know this longing yourselves, and if you do, please take care of yourselves and your hearts. Because it's a longing, it's a soulful longing. But whether it's for a child or not, some it's family, it's healing, it's for war to be no more. To hope is a scary thing. because we don't want to be foolish in our hoping. And so sometimes we hope with qualifiers, right? Well, I hope, but I get that it may not happen, or I need to be realistic, or whatever capacity allows you to keep some of that self-protection. Hope is scary. And so Zechariah, he's met by Gabriel. One, also, even though it was the sanctuary where they were to possibly meet the divine of some kind or a divine messenger, like it didn't happen regularly. So he's just going about his business like a normal shift. And then Gabriel appears, and Gabriel's like, by the way, God's heard your prayer. You're going to have a kid, a son, in fact, named John. Part of me wonders if Luke had a little bit of creative liberty when it's like, and he shall not have strong drink. Because let's face it, later when we meet John, some of us have wondered if he had some strong drink. And so Luke is like, he can't, right? But he hears all of this. And poor Zechariah, whose hope had not been fulfilled, is told it finally will. And he asks what any typical person who'd been hoping for a really long time asks, how will this be? For I am getting old, and so is my wife. Very logical, understandable questions, right? And then Gabriel says, well, here's how it's going to happen, but because you asked and did not believe me, you shall be mute until it does. That's rough. And Gabriel, come on, you know what's going on. And Zechariah clearly, that just doesn't seem fair. Also, I have so many questions about how he and Elizabeth navigated that during the entire pregnancy until John was born, right? I have so many questions, mainly for Elizabeth and how it felt to her. But think about Zechariah. He finally has this news and can't go home and be like, Elizabeth, guess what? This is what happened to me. We will have a son. We will have a child. How wonderful is our God? I do really appreciate that Luke notes that he came out gesturing, and I have to wonder, was he like, angel, baby Elizabeth? What were the gestures? And also the other people were like, he must have seen a divine figure. Who would have thought that? I wouldn't have. I would have been like, okay, so who's filling in for Zechariah in the coming shifts? Because this is not okay. So we're here, right? Sunday of hope. Zechariah is finally told that his weariness, which means you don't want to see or experience something any longer, is gone or will be. And we don't know how long Zechariah was mute, because even in the coming verses, it just says until these things took place. So it could have been a very long time. And I hope that in that silence, joy percolated in him. That the divine message really sunk in. And even in his silence, he was able to rejoice for the son that was to come. It reminds me that even in our weariness, we don't have to be alone. He was silenced, but he wasn't alone. As soon as he left his duties, he was met with his colleagues. And sure, he couldn't communicate easily, but he tried to figure out a new way of expressing what he had been told. And so this Advent season, we ask, how does a weary world rejoice? It's that we do it together, in part. But this Sunday, in your order of worship, it says, we acknowledge our weariness. How many of you have ever had something so daunting that just grew bigger and bigger and bigger because you held it in? Our beautiful imaginations grew it into this monstrous thing. But then when you finally told someone, it deflated a little bit and got back to actual size. Because when you vocalized it, you removed some of its power. The power of uncertainty, the power of fear. And so, our weariness does not have to be something we hold by ourselves. Some of you may note that it sounds like a familiar line in a hymn or carol. O Holy Night. It talks about Jesus being born, so we won't hear it during Advent. You can listen to it at home. I did on the drive-in. There's so many wonderful versions. But what's interesting is this particular hymn was written by a French atheist, composed by a Jewish composer, and then translated into English by a Unitarian minister. I love that, because it takes all of us, is what that tells me. It takes all of us to proclaim that Christ will be born. I looked at Anne because it's not Christmas Eve yet. But Christ will be born. It takes all of us to be able to proclaim that. And this particular hymn became a favorite of abolitionists here in the States because it's a call for justice. The law is love, the gospel is peace, this hymn proclaims. The law is love, and the gospel is peace. It reminds me of Mary. She also gets visited, right? She asks a question, but she asks, how will this come to be? She trusts that it will. She doesn't have as much skepticism as Zechariah. She's also, age plays a part, I think, in the questions being asked. Zechariah has had years upon years upon years where his unfulfilled hope has hardened his belief. Mary is younger. There's less to stand in between her. She was not wanting a child, right? Very different scenarios. But they both, the hymn of O Holy Night and Mary's Magnificat, capture that joy and justice go hand in hand. Sometimes it feels like we have to put joy away until everything gets figured out, right? In one of the commentaries I read this week, it said that after the commentator's grandfather died, they were in this deep state of grief. And a couple months after, they were still very sorrowful. And something came up to remind them of their grandfather, and they broke out in laughter. And she writes that joy interrupted my grief like a loud dinner guest. Sometimes we feel like we have to only feel one thing. That if we are sorrowful or grief-stricken or going through intense hardship, that we can't let the joy come in. But our Advent series creators, Sanctified Art, remind us that joy is a companion feeling. It is rarely felt in isolation. So as you feel weary this Advent season, know that you can also have those moments of joy. And you are not betraying whatever the other feelings are communicating to you. So if you have grief this season, when you have those moments of joy, let them come in. Because joy helps bloom justice. Because if we remove all the joy until everything's fixed, injustice will reign. So let your weariness fuel your acts of justice so that your law can be love and your gospel be peace. And when you feel joy in such a way that it interrupts whatever hardship you may be going through, know that that joy is not selfish. It is just trying to remind you that you are alive and that you were made for joy. So, dear ones, be the complex beings that you are. Live into the thrill of hope, no matter how scary it can be. And may you realize that we get through the weariness together, that we live joy and weariness, not separate from each other, but impacted by one another. So when you see children playing, and you feel guilty because there are children in Gaza and in Ukraine and in Sudan who have a different experience, lean into that joy, friends. Lean into it, because that joy is what will propel you to act. It will inspire you to make change. Don't feel guilty for your joy. The world needs it. So share it abundantly. And from your joy, we shall risk our hope together as we wait for the Christ child once again. Amen.